It began with a single string of lights, warm, golden bulbs draped across the porch railing. For years, my family had made it a tradition to decorate early, filling our small home with color and cheer as December approached. But this year, the glow of my lights didn't just catch the attention of passing cars, it caught the wrath of the HOA president. The community of Willow Creek prided itself on being elegant and uniform. Every house had the same dull beige paint, the same generic shrubs, and the same dim porch lights. It was the kind of place where any sign of personality was treated like rebellion. My lights, though harmless and festive, stood out against the monotony. Within days of setting them up, I found a neatly folded letter taped to my front door. It was the HOA's signature cream-colored paper, embossed with the association's golden crest. The letter accused me of violating community aesthetic guidelines by displaying decorations deemed excessive and disruptive. There was a $250 fine attached, along with a warning that further violations would result in daily penalties. I remember standing there, looking out at my modest decorations, wondering how anyone could find joy offensive. The lights twinkled softly in the cold air, innocent yet defiant. Around me, the rest of the street was shrouded in darkness, save for the faint flicker of television screens through curtained windows. Word spread quickly. Neighbors whispered about the Christmas light violation as if it were a crime. Some laughed, others shook their heads afraid to get involved. But I could sense something else, a quiet frustration that had been building for years among residents tired of the HOA's overreach. That night, I turned off the lights, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to think. The front of my home fell into darkness, and with it, a strange emptiness settled in. But even as the last bulb dimmed, an idea began to spark. If one set of lights was too much for the HOA, what would happen if the entire neighborhood decided to shine? That thought lingered in my mind long after midnight, glowing brighter than any bulb I had hung that week. And by the time the sun rose the next morning, I knew this wasn't just about decorations anymore. It was about standing up to the people who thought they could control joy. The next chapter would mark the beginning of my quiet rebellion, one that would turn a simple holiday display into a citywide spectacle. The morning after I took down my lights, the neighborhood felt colder than ever. The air was still, heavy with the dull hum of conformity. Every house looked identical again, as if nothing festive had ever touched them. Yet, beneath that sameness, something was shifting, a shared irritation, a simmering discontent that had long been ignored. It started small. A neighbor named Frank stopped me at the mailbox the next day. He whispered how unfair it was that the HOA fined me for lights when others had tacky lawn ornaments year-round. Another neighbor, Lisa, sent me a discreet message that read, "You're not the only one tired of them." The HOA's arrogance had finally gone too far, and people were beginning to notice. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and a cup of coffee gone cold. I began sketching ideas. What if we all put up decorations? Not just a few houses, everyone. If they wanted uniformity, we'd give them a uniform glow bright enough to be seen from space. But to pull this off, it couldn't just be rebellion. It had to be official, legal, and untouchable. I started researching city ordinances and public permits. It turned out that holiday displays could be protected under community event laws, especially if registered as a seasonal celebration. If I could get the city to sponsor a neighborhood holiday light festival, the HOA would have no legal power to stop it. Their own rules would crumble under the weight of a city seal. The next week, I began quietly spreading the word. I visited neighbors under the guise of casual chats, dropped flyers in mailboxes, and even slipped notes under doors. People responded with enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. Families who barely spoke to one another were suddenly excited, swapping ideas about decorations, themes, and lights. Meanwhile, the HOA president, a woman named Marjorie, strutted around like she owned the place. She didn't realize what was coming. She thought the issue had been settled, that her fine had shut me up. But every dark window she passed belonged to someone now planning to hang a string of defiance. By the end of the month, I had the paperwork ready. The city approved the event faster than I expected, even offering minor funding for community engagement. It was official. Willow Creek was about to host its first ever holiday light festival. I smiled as I printed the approval letter. The HOA had fined me for too many lights. Now, they'd have to drive through a neighborhood filled with thousands of them, sanctioned by the city itself. As December drew closer, the stage was set for a showdown that would change Willow Creek forever. By the first week of December, the transformation of Willow Creek had begun. Garages buzzed with drills, ladders leaned against roofs, and the faint scent of pine and paint filled the crisp winter air. What had once been a silent, dull neighborhood now echoed with laughter, collaboration, and the sound of rebellion disguised as festivity. Strings of colored bulbs stretched across fences and trees. Inflatable snowmen rose from front yards like sentinels of cheer. Even the most reserved families contributed something: a wreath, a string of icicles, or a glowing reindeer. Each decoration was a quiet act of defiance, a shared statement that joy was not subject to approval. From her position atop the HOA, Marjorie watched with growing fury. She sent out warning letters almost daily, citing violations and aesthetic disruptions. But for the first time, no one cared. Her threats were powerless now that the city had endorsed the event. When she tried to contact City Hall to complain, she was told politely that the display was officially registered as a municipal community activity. The HOA's authorities stopped where city law began. Still, Marjorie wasn't done fighting. She began patrolling the streets in her silver SUV, clipboard in hand, documenting what she called infractions. She even hired a private attorney to argue that the festival violated noise ordinances and safety codes. But with every attempt, she met resistance. The city had sent representatives to monitor the project, and they were impressed the neighborhood was bringing people together, not causing harm. Meanwhile, the spirit of unity grew. Families who had never spoken were now sharing hot chocolate under canopies of light. Children laughed as they helped string decorations across driveways. For the first time, Willow Creek felt alive, not like a sterile collection of houses, but a real community. Marjorie's frustration peaked when a local news crew arrived to cover the story. They filmed the twinkling streets, interviewing residents about the beautiful display of neighborhood unity. The report aired that night, and suddenly Willow Creek became a local sensation. Cars began driving through in slow lines, headlights reflecting off glittering ornaments. Each passing night brought more visitors, more joy, and more frustration for the HOA. The president's own home, stark and undecorated, became a dark blot in a sea of brilliance. People whispered as they drove by, laughing quietly at the irony. And through it all, I watched from my porch, sipping coffee as my house glowed brighter than ever. The very lights that once brought me fines were now part of a movement that had outshone every rule the HOA had tried to enforce. But Marjorie wasn't finished yet. As the festival reached its peak, she was preparing a final move, one last attempt to shut us down for good.